Welcome, everyone. Good morning to you, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today at the Newcastle Settlement Partnerships Regional Settlement Conference. My name is Dor Akech Achek. I'm the Head of Settlement Services at Settlement Services International and will be your MC today. Could I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many land from which we are joining this webinar today. I am speaking from the Armadale land of the Darug Nation. I pay respect to elders past, present, and future, and to the continuation of cultural, spiritual, and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Ancestors have walked this country, and SSI acknowledges a special and unique place in our nation's historical, cultural, and linguistic identity. Once again, welcome to the Regional Sermon Conference. I would like to begin by a little bit of a housekeeping. And to start off, as this is an online webinar, the online tech is being managed by CTS. And we've got Milo and Sophia from SSI that would be able to support you if you have any concern or tech-related query. We'll start the day with opening remarks from the NSB organization's key leaders, Violet and Sharon. We will then hear from a client before we can go into a panel of experts comprised of key practitioners within the NSB regional partners. They will cover a topic on strengthening settlement capacity and social cohesion with a Q&A at the end. Then we shall hear from our keynote presenter, David Wilden from the Department of Home Affairs, who will give us an insight into the vision for regional settlement according to the government. We shall then have a morning tea or a little bit of time to stretch our leg, and then we will come back to resume with lived experience from one of our service users, Arun Nepal. We shall then have another insight from the expertise from City of Newcastle and as well from Northern Settlement Services to talk on connection with the core community and networking. After which we can also invite another lived experience, and then we'll conclude with a reflection from SSI General Manager for Newcomers Services, Settlement and Integration, Yamama Aga. Our final speaker will be Raquel, the CEO of IMS, who will conclude the day with policy recommendations that came from this project. And then hopefully we will finish off the day. When I think of the significance of such a day and the importance of us being here today, I look back at my journey from a refugee camp, being settled in a regional town. 19 years ago, nearly 19 years ago, I was settled in a little town in Queensland called Toowoomba, a regional town by then. And to find myself as a teenager in a somewhat cultural, cosmopolitan of a regional town in Australia, as well as coming from a place of hope to then start a new life and being given that new life through the community integration, I was able to find connections with local community members, service providers who were supporting my family to settle, and neighbors in the regional town, as towns will be small, that would support my goals around education and the whole health and well-being. And reflecting it today, it is the same process that each and every new arrival would go through to try and find their place, and more so in a difficult geographical location in a regional center. So our today's conference will cover some of the insight that practitioners bring to the life of people settling in regional areas. And to start off with this discussion and with this particular insight, we've lined up a day that would give you an opportunity to be able to take away what does it look like to provide services to people in the regional areas? What does it look like to settle in a regional area? What does it look like to be able to succeed in a regional area? What do we need? And at the end of the day, we'll be able to formulate some of the recommendation. If there is a listening here, we'll be able to take some of those recommendations to implementation. So brace yourself, join us, and feel free to contribute, ask questions, as well as share your insight through the chat. As it is, the participant will have the Q&A section to themselves. Feel free to use that whenever you want, either be during the speeches or after the end of that particular speech. You will have your section later on to make those comments. Without further ado, I would like to invite SSI CEO Violet Rumiliotis to give her opening address. Welcome, Violet.
Thank you very much, Joel, and welcome everyone. We have invited you here today to highlight the importance of settlement support in regional areas and the vital role that our regional network plays in the New South Wales settlement sector. But I first would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. I pay respect to elders past, present and future, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I'm here today on the land of the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation. Ancestors have walked this country, and I acknowledge their special and unique place in our nation's historical, cultural and linguistic identity. And I also acknowledge any Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander colleagues and their attendees here with us today. I further acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which you are on this call and pay respect to their elders. So the idea of this conference has been brewing for some time. It sprung from the idea that regional settlement deserves more attention. Australia is one of the most urbanised nations in the world, with 67% of the population living in capital cities, with migrants more urban than non-migrants. Regional and rural areas often miss out on the social and economic benefits of migration because newcomers are more likely to live in a capital city, where there are more employment opportunities, more infrastructure and established social connections. This is amplified by out-migration of people from regional areas, driven by opportunities in the cities. So in 2019, the Australian government released the Planning for Australia's Future Population Report, addressing the impact of population growth on infrastructure, housing, transport, health, education and social cohesion services across Australia. One of the key themes of the plan was promoting growth in regional areas. The key factors that affect the retention of migrants who settle in regional and rural Australia are no-brainers really: employment, children's education, lifestyle, availability of services, and the warmth of the welcome from locals. And international and Australian experience indicates that local community attitudes and involvement and strong social networks within the between communities are important prerequisites for regional settlement. Yet regional settlement policy often doesn't consider the local host community conditions or the aspirations of newcomers. Furthermore, regional areas often lack the specialised health, education and housing services needed by refugees and migrants, and the additional supports that newcomers to regional areas need to successfully integrate into the local labour market. Local service providers and government agencies often lack the skills and capacities to work with newcomers, which affects access to universal services. So the New South Wales Settlement Partnership is a consortium of settlement providers, with a footprint across Sydney and regional New South Wales, through which we deliver the Australian Government's Settlement, Engagement and Transition Support Program. The partnership believes there is a need for a coordinated, holistic approach to regional development that enhances regional settlement, emphasises the retention of migrants and refugees, and acknowledges the role that they can and do play in reinvigorating regional areas. And our regional partners are doing an extraordinary job of supporting newcomers to feel welcome and settle into their communities. But we know there are a number of challenges and areas that require strengthening. And this is why they have come together today, harnessing their insights and sharing their perspective on what the key ingredients of successful regional settlement are. Everything from affordable housing, educational and employment opportunities, and culturally responsive service delivery. The document, Insights into Regional Settlement in Practice, which you will have received when you registered to attend this conference, provides insights based on our years of expertise in settlement service delivery in regional areas of New South Wales. There are also case studies that highlight the challenges our clients face and perspectives on what underpins successful regional settlement. We hope that after reading that report and participating in our conversations today, you'll become familiar with the insights of our regional partners. Our partners are Connecting Community Services in Dubbo, covering the far west and Arana, Illawarra Multicultural Services in Wollongong, covering the Illawarra, Wingeyo-Caribbee and Nowra, Manning Valley Neighbourhood Centres Services in the Mid-North Coast, covering Taree, Forster, Gloucester and surrounding areas, Nepean Multicultural Access in the Blue Mountains, covering Penrith, the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury, and Northern Settlement Services in Newcastle, covering the Hunter, New England and Central Coast with offices in both in Armadale and Tamworth. In the New South Wales Settlement Partnership, we believe that diversity in our regions does not receive sufficient recognition. Take Manning Valley, for example, where there are more than 100 different countries of origin. The 2016 census indicated that the population born overseas was 9.4%, while the non-English speaking population was 3.6% and the Indigenous population was 6.2%. And we think there are a number of challenges that need to be addressed if regional settlement is to be a success. For instance, settlement workers in regional areas are only funded part-time or as sole workers. They're often looked to as cultural consultants for mainstream services. They have to spend more time than their metropolitan counterparts in travelling to see clients, often covering large distances across several LGAs. The movement of migrants to regional areas can sustain and grow the population, bring about economic opportunities, grow and diversify the regional economy and employment base, and create more vibrant and cohesive communities. There are a number of incentives and pathways to regional settlement. These pathways should inform regional migration policy, supported by alignment between host community needs, settlement capacity and settlement capability, and newcomer aspirations, as well as dialogue and consultation with First Nations communities and, of course, diaspora communities. At SSI, we support a regional settlement approach that builds social connections through community-led activities. We think regional migration and settlement policy should seek to align the aspirations of newcomers with host community needs, settlement capacities and capabilities at a local level. Coordinated, place-based community engagement initiatives can provide a platform to recognise the shared aspirations of the local host community and newcomers, while also creating a welcoming and socially inclusive environment. As the fabric and culture of each regional community is unique, local assessments need to be valued. Proper preparatory work with host communities is needed to generate insights into community capacity and capability indicators, as well as community-based solutions. And newcomers in regional areas should feel empowered to make life choices and shape their future in their new community. But we cannot emphasise enough that while community engagement and social cohesion are important, there is no substitute for the specialised settlement services and expertise that settlement providers are able to offer newcomers. Strong, adequately funded and resourced settlement services, including individualised client services, case management, advocacy, referrals, and working directly with clients to support great outcomes in areas such as employment, education, training, housing, transport, and English language acquisition can help newly arrived people to gain confidence and become self-reliant in a new and unfamiliar environment. And providing these kinds of services also ensures that there are fewer burdens on the community and prevents an over-reliance on community goodwill. Despite COVID-19 and the subsequent border closures and changes to the government's humanitarian program, regional settlement remains extremely important. There's an opportunity for us as settlement providers to contribute to the development of regional migration policy, taking into consideration the need for a holistic and coordinated approach that enhances regional settlement, emphasises the retention of migrants and refugees, and acknowledges the role that they can and do play in revitalising and diversifying our regional areas. That is why events like this, through which we can share and exchange our collective insights as people working in this sector, are so very important. I look forward to hearing from today's speakers and hope together we can highlight the important work done and needing to be done to ensure our regions continue to be favourable destinations for newly arrived individuals and communities. Thank you. Thanks, Dor.
Thank you, Violet. It's really a strong highlight of today's themes, and they will come more into depth later on by our speakers in connecting with the themes that you highlighted, such as harnessing and the insight and sharing the perspective of what are the key ingredients to regional settlement in our locations, and what does successful regional settlement look like if we were to think through that, and also highlighting the challenges that are faced by people settling in the regional areas, but also by the services that provide the range of support that to newly arrived people in those areas. It's also highlighted the importance of community engagement and, strengthening the partnerships with the local community, with the, Indigenous population, as well as the newly arrived communities. And also the importance, which I will continue to talk over the whole day to emphasize, the importance of specialized role of the settlement services in being able to support the community and not relying on the goodwill of the community. So thank you very much for highlighting those key themes. I would like now to turn my attention to Sharon Daish, who's the CEO of Northern Settlement Services, NSS, to deliver an overview of the regional settlement as a provider in the regional settlement. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Dor, and thank you, Violet, for that extremely comprehensive introduction to the event today. Good morning, everyone, and it's lovely to have so many people who've joined us online this morning. And I'm coming to you from the Awabakal country. I won't repeat the acknowledgement of country other than to say that we all recognise that the land that we come to you from has not been ceded. We recognise the sovereignty of the traditional custodians of the land. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sharon Daish, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Northern Settlement Services. And Northern Settlement Services has been supporting multicultural communities for over 40 years and providing regional settlement services. I understand the regional context. I grew up in Melbourne and I have lived in Sydney for a short period, but for over 40 years, I've lived in regional locations, from tiny outback communities to coastal suburbs and to larger cities like Newcastle and also Dubbo. I've experienced the contrast of welcome and isolation that can occur in regional areas. And I know how each regional location is unique and distinct. We can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you, Milo. So Northern Settlement Service, or NSS for short because it's easier to say, is a member of the New South Wales Settlement Partnership, and we deliver the Settlement Engagement Transition Support Program, or settlement services, across a large and really diverse area of New South Wales. Our head office is located in Newcastle, but we cover the Central Coast, the Hunter and the New England area of New South Wales from 4 offices. So it's really geographically large, 123,000 square kilometres, with more than 10,000 people who are eligible for the settlement programs that we offer. Both Newcastle and Armadale have a unique factor in that they're designated refugee settlement areas. And I won't go into that now, but it is quite different. And I and others will speak more about that today. But to put it into context, Newcastle's a regional city. It's quite close to Sydney. It has a very large population, whereas Armadale is a rural town of around 24,000 people. And there are over 600 of the Yazidi community, who are a highly traumatised community who were settled as refugees since 2018. So really, really different to the many diverse ethnic communities who are in Newcastle, whereas in Armadale there's one group that have settled there. And the characteristics of these locations they're almost polar opposite. And you'll hear more from other speakers about those unique differences of different locations later today. So, in the next slide, please. Regional settlement is different, and every single regional community is different. It's different in its characteristics. Delivery of settlement services in regional areas is significantly more resource intensive than in metropolitan areas. This is proportionate to the size of the community, the distance from metropolitan services or large regional centres, and also the scale of humanitarian settlement, and especially the scale of humanitarian settlement in contrast to the actual size of the community and the other characteristics of the community. And this slide's sort of a rough example to give context between the difference between Sydney Metro with population density, service density, and even though people in Sydney wouldn't think of it, the distances are much less in Sydney to get from service to service, compared to, for instance, Wollongong, which is in the Illawarra region, a much smaller population, much less density, although still, like Newcastle, quite close to Sydney. And then the complete opposite contrast with the New England region, where we have very, very large geographical area, low population, and towns like Armadale of 24,000 people with a large refugee settlement, a significant scale refugee settlement. So regional areas offer really lots and lots of benefits. They offer a fabulous lifestyle. They can often offer a really warm welcome, lower cost of living, even housing. Even though housing is a challenge everywhere, housing is still more affordable in regional areas. And there are opportunities for host communities around economic benefit from having a broader population base. And there are many factors that differentiate settlement in regions, though. One of those is that and probably a very main one, is that there are far fewer established culturally diverse communities or multicultural organisations to support settlement of newcomers. So that rich infrastructure, that rich multicultural infrastructure that occurs in metropolitan areas either doesn't exist at all or is much thinner in regional areas. Public transport can be completely non-existent in regional areas, and even in larger cities like Newcastle, it's much more limited than in Sydney, and distances are greater. So owning a car, having a driver's licence, having that access to your own mode of transport becomes much more critical in regional areas. And again, the smaller the community, the greater the distance from a regional centre or a city, the services that are actually in town may not even exist. So some communities don't have a high school. Very few communities and smaller communities have specialised medical services. So again, that piece around travel becomes more critical and people can spend really long times commuting. There are limited mainstream services in general in regional areas. And again, especially the smaller or more distant regional areas. And within those mainstream services, and this is one of the key differences, there are very few multicultural staff. There's very, very unlikely to have any culturally and linguistically diverse specialist positions. And those mainstream services often have very limited capacity to respond to the specific needs of multicultural communities. So there's some of the key differences that make regional settlement very, very different and require a more intensive approach and often a longer involvement with our clients in regional areas. So moving on to the next slide, there are a variety of reasons why people come to settle in regional areas. There are all of the attractions that I spoke about, but there are other reasons. So in general, primary settlement is where someone who's come to Australia settles immediately in a regional area as their first home in Australia, and that'll be an individual or a family. And logically, secondary settlement is where they've settled in one place, either regionally or in the city, and then moved to another. And that individual or family may choose a regional area for a variety of reasons. They may have community, there may be a community already in the area, they may have family connections, they may have work opportunities. Other drivers include universities who are seeking international students, and those international students may well move on to apply for citizenship and live in Australia, or live permanently under another reason in Australia. And local governments and communities and individuals themselves may choose to sponsor or otherwise seek to attract migrants and people of refugee background to come to live in rural communities. And again, that can be for a variety of reasons. It might be through personal connections. It might be for a desire to diversify the population base, to provide a broader workforce, and for a variety of other reasons. And as I mentioned earlier, some areas are designated refugee settlement areas. And for us in Newcastle, Newcastle is a designated refugee settlement area, as is Armadale. And that makes those areas quite different and unique. For instance, Tamworth, even though it's larger than Armadale, is not a designated refugee settlement area, and nor is the Central Coast, and that's in our intake area for Northern Settlement Services. And that creates a very different experience for people of refugee background if they are coming to an area where it's not a designated settlement area, because in a designated settlement area, they have a very high level of support. They have the government-funded refugee humanitarian settlement program, which provides very intensive services, along with settlement services. Settlement services tend to be available in all areas, the less intensive settlement services, but things like refugee health network are not available if it's not a designated area, or STARTS, the organisation providing services for survivors of torture and trauma. So moving on to settlement workers within this context. Settlement workers provide a much higher level of community and individual support in regional areas. And that's directly because multicultural specific community resources, services and volunteers are limited or absent in regional areas, that whole spectrum of infrastructure of multicultural support, and therefore the reliance on settlement workers and specialised settlement providers is much higher. Settlement workers in regional areas spend a lot of time triaging, referring clients who might have been referred to our organisation in the first instance by a mainstream service. However, for one reason or another, they're actually not eligible for our service, because unfortunately quite often our services are government funded and there's an eligibility criteria. So we have this situation where someone is referred into our service and then we need to refer them back to a mainstream organisation. And often that comes with it the need to educate the mainstream organisation around providing support to people from a multicultural background. And the referrals into us are unavoidable, because even though there are limitations on eligibility, local services and community members don't differentiate. They see someone who has a need, they're from a multicultural background, and they'll refer to the expert settlement provider, who's often the only or one of a very few multicultural service providers in that location. And very frequently there are no other multicultural specific service providers. And that's why the reliance on our services is much, much higher, because you don't have that multicultural community infrastructure in regional areas in as great a level as you do in Sydney, and sometimes, as I said, completely absent. And to combat this issue, settlement providers spend a significant amount of time and resources educating mainstream services and community organisations and communities when that community or the service is ill-equipped to respond to cultural diversity. And it's especially true where there are high levels of torture and trauma in newcomer communities. So all of that wrapped up means that the settlement worker and the settlement organisations are providing a much more intensive response and quite a different response in regional areas. So moving on to a very key aspect of settlement in regional areas, and that is partnership, collaboration, and sharing of education around multicultural communities. And that's one of the ways that settlement providers seek to maximise effective settlement in regional areas by partnering and collaborating across the regional community. It includes partnering with other service agencies, convening multicultural interagencies, partnering with mainstream or multicultural organisations. And through that process, the value of the work is mutual, it's exponential, and it's very rich. When settlement providers work with and across the whole spectrum of the host community, relationships and cultural awareness have the opportunity to deepen. Everybody learns from each other. Community organisations often have an opportunity to increase their understanding of governance, and that strengthens their capacity. For mainstream services, it's often about becoming more capable of providing the services required by the multicultural community. And the value of partnering and collaboration can't be overestimated, and it'll be illustrated further by other speakers. So in conclusion, the settlement of migrants and people of refugee background in regional areas presents many benefits, and we'll move on to the last slide, please. Regional communities can offer a really warm welcome. The cost of living can be lower, and the lifestyle can be fabulously relaxed compared to the city. Diversity of cultural backgrounds brings vibrancy to regional communities. Migration brings economic opportunities along with population growth, and in some cases just simply population stability. Realising these benefits requires collaboration, adequately resourced professional settlement services, culturally responsive mainstream services and community organisations, and of course a willing, warm, welcoming host community must all work together to support culturally diverse newcomers to overcome whatever barriers they might face so they can thrive in the unique regional environment. And it's now my very great pleasure to hand over and hear the voices of the New South Wales Settlement Partnership clients. They are the people who can speak with the greatest truth of their experience of settling in regional areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sharon, for such a wonderful insight to regional settlement and for highlighting again the important work that is done by providers like you who are local and connected to the communities. I hear your strong point around the work that the regional providers do in educating the mainstream providers around the challenges that the newly arrived people bring to regional areas, and the connection to the host community and the local communities for the newly arrived people. The immense work done to triage and try to resolve, and it's not light work, to be able to identify where best you can provide a referral to, where best you can support a newly arrived, and the support that is provided as the community organization like yours are the experts in understanding and working and have built a long history of working with culturally and linguistically diverse communities. So I also wanted to highlight the fact that you mentioned the key aspects of the regional settlement, the successful regional settlement. And I like that trifecta of the host community who would be supported to enhance the welcoming environment for newly arrived. And then the mainstream community, the mainstream service providers who would be able to provide services that are not funded and have limited existence in the settlement space. And the settlement providers will become the link and connection between the client, the host community, and the mainstream service providers. And I really applaud that approach where we can have a stronger and more connected partnership and collaboration to ensure people settling in regional areas do access support. So thank you for highlighting that. Now I'd like to turn to Perry and Akram. Perry is from the Northern Settlement Services and will be able to share the insights from a service recipient, Akram. For the benefit of facilitating a much more engageful conversation, Perry is going to do an interview with Akram. And so welcome Perry and Akram. And after this, there will be Q&As if you would want to. So welcome.
Hi guys, thanks for that, Dor. Hello everyone, welcome today. I'm Perry, a settlement worker from Northern Settlement Services located in Armadale, New South Wales. Today we welcome Akram Khudeda to our regional settlement conference. Akram's originally from Iraq and he's been in Australia now for 2.5 years. He's here in Australia with his family, consisting of his mother, his father, 2 brothers and 4 sisters. Quite a large family. Akram still has 2 brothers and 2 sisters living overseas in Iraq. We'll kick things off. Akram, when you first came to Armadale, what were your first impressions? Was there anything that surprised you?
Yes, when I came in. It was it was winter, so it was very cold, and also there was a lot of trees. In anywhere I go, I could see a lot of trees. What surprised me, where I saw lots of EZD community here, and they offer me a help if I need it. And also people were very welcoming, yeah. And they were nodding their head when they walked by, and I really felt like very welcome. And one time I was coming to, it was first time for me coming to SSI office, so I didn't know where it was. So I asked there were some ladies. I asked them where is SSI, and they knew straight away that I'm EZD from Iraq. So they only need 2 words, which Chawani Bashi, and it means like, hi, how are you? So they tell me Chawani Bashi. So I was very happy. I said, oh, there are people who's like learning to help. So they give me direction to SSI. It was great.
That must have been fantastic for you to. What a surprise for somebody to say, hello, how are you in your own language.
Yes, it was first Australian people I talked to. So they said Chawani Bashi. It was great.
That's amazing. Having that community here is so good. So essentially when you first came, it was really, really cold.
Yeah.
You mentioned when we spoke yesterday that when Akram arrived, he arrived in June. Armadale in June is not too pleasant. You know, you're lucky if it's 5 degrees. You would have come out of summer, midsummer in Iraq.
Yes, it was super hot. So when I came here, it was very cold. So I kind of like.
Yeah, that was different. Okay. What do you like about living in a regional area like Armadale?
What I like about it's very peaceful city and quiet, and people are very, very like friendly.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Also I'm from a smaller city than Armadale, so I'm very quite comfortable with it.
Yeah, maybe that's an important thing in regional settlement, that coming from Iraq, like a small town or a large village, you're coming to Armadale, you're going to feel at ease a little bit more.
Yes, and I also like learned like living here easier. If I would be in bigger city like Sydney, it would have taken more time for me, like to get the area and everything.
I think that what you mentioned earlier about walking down the street and people nodding to you.
Yeah.
Does that feel more like home?
Not really. In Iraq, we don't nod our head like that. We just like when we say hi, we say we would like we have like raise our like hand,
Yeah, okay.
or like say hi, how are you, like, so but we don't already do that.
So the whole nodding thing's a little bit different.
Yeah, it was different, but I knew it's like hi, like something like welcoming things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I love
Because
that.
people were smiling and would like nodding their head. I love it.
So even if there's a language difference, you can still see people being positive and friendly towards you. Yeah, that's beautiful. Have there been any challenges for you or your family living in a regional area?
Yes, the challenges are for my family and I is finding a good job.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of opportunity here, and as we are like my English is not that good. And
I think you're Akram's only been here for 2.5 years, so I think his English is very good. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. And also there isn't like a lot of courses in here in like TAFE or university. For example, if someone wanted to do like course, let's give like hairdresser example, and they need to travel to Tamil or which is like 1.5 hours away from here. So twice or 3 times a week they have to do that. And also doctors, there isn't a lot of specialist doctors here.
Yeah.
If someone needed like surgery, they need to travel whether to Tamil or Newcastle. For myself, I had to travel to Kosovo to do my surgery.
Yeah.
So that also is a bit challenging for someone new in Australia and don't know like these whole cities and everything.
Yeah, so just to recap that, so if you wanted to do a barber course, they don't offer that in Armadale here. You need to go to Tamworth, which, as Akram said, is about 1.5-hour drive. From what I know, I think that's maybe 2 or 3 days a week. So that's a lot of travelling back to do a barbering course. The specialist side of things, Tamworth, once again, 1.5 hours. If you needed, I think the hearing specialists, a lot of those are based in Newcastle. That's a 4.5-hour drive. Then you're bringing in transport issues, staying the night. So you have those sort of issues in a regional area. They're not on tap, they're not on hand, but you sort of balance those with the positives. What are your hopes for you and your family living in Armadale?
My biggest hope for myself and my family are build a great future in Australia. We're really hoping to build a good future by getting different degrees in university or courses, do different courses and getting like good jobs, and then and also be able to help the community. And that's the biggest hope that I hope.
Yeah, I think that was a big factor in coming to Australia for your family.
Yes,
was looking towards the future.
Coming to Australia for my family was the main reason. In Iraq, like my dad was nurse, so we didn't really like it wasn't like many other things like brought us, just safety and future.
Success, supporting you when you came to the country and going forward.
It made very big difference for us. They helped us with a lot of different things. When you first arrive to like a country, you don't know like the language or anything. It's great to have services like SIL and NSS to help like assist. The SSI first was assisting us with like going to our appointment, like they showed us the GP and market, and they also they help us to rent a house, and they did a lot of things for us. And also now NSS also is doing a lot of different things like filling forms, and so now actually we are getting independent. We try to do our like a job like what we need by ourselves.
Yeah,
that is great.
Yeah. So SSI initially is connecting you with services, government services, Centrelink, opening bank accounts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that they did all of this.
Yeah, that's great. And then NSS going forward, assisting with stuff that needs that crop up, trying to build capacity going forward. A lot of our cohort here are coming towards 4 years with their settlement now in Armadale. So the citizenship is on the radar now for a lot of the community members. So that's a new process that we need to work through to make sure that we're able to assist our clients in doing that. Okay, we'll go on a question. What would you say to somebody living in Sydney who is considering moving to a regional area like Armadale?
I would say the original area like Armadale. For like I would say my experience, it's great. It's very peaceful, as I said earlier, and it's very quiet. People are here very friendly. So I would advise that person who's coming to find a job first, a job that he or she hoping to do, and also like rent a house. And I hope everything goes well. Yeah.
See, you're obviously pretty positive about settlement in a regional area like Armadale, but you look at housing and jobs as a main thing to maybe secure a job before coming.
Yes, and education as well.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Akram, what are some of the achievements your family have made since coming to Australia?
Achievement that we are like we are achieving. Sorry.
That's okay.
So we are learning language,
yeah.
And we are getting independent, doing our what we need by ourselves, and also we like myself and my sibling we are able to work here, and I was able to get a job with NSS, and in different I also got 2 different jobs. And we're also getting like certificate done at TAFE, and my sister like finished high school. I think and we're hoping for more.
Yeah, I know for yourself that it's only 2.5 years. I think you've got great English. Like I say, you've come through, and now that you've actually been working with NSS on a part-time basis with digital communications, where you're able to go back into the community and assist other community members with anything that's techie. And it's been really invaluable to the community, which is fantastic. I'm just going to have a look at the Q&A here. We've got a question come through. How have your family founded in Armadale and your siblings? So how have your brothers and sisters found it?
I think my younger brothers, I think they found it. I would say they have like what I said. They like that how they found it, and maybe my younger one, they like it more than me because they don't have like if it's like big city. If they needed to do different activity, they have to like always go by cars, or they cannot do it by themselves. But here in Armadale, it's more. They just can walk, and like 10-15 minutes they can get whatever they like. They like. So they like it. I would say more than me.
Yeah, you're sort of in the middle. You've got older siblings and younger siblings. Is there much difference to your older ones to your younger ones?
Yeah. I think there is different. Like one of my sisters, she wanted to move to big city. Yeah. So actually she went. She's studying in Toronto right now.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And she's doing and that we have like big some like different opinion, but like the mainly we would like to stay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. Just going back to Sophia, how are we going for time?
We're about there. So we can answer one more.
one more question.
Okay, sure, no problem.
The question is in the chat there, Perry. Can you see that?
Okay, won't be a second.
Thank you, I can down.
Okay, here we go. Akram, you mentioned that an Iraqi lived in a small town. Do people living in small towns in Iraq experience similar issues when trying to access specialist services or doctors?
At the doctors in Armada here like much better than Iraq, than where I live. Like in my small town, like where I'm from, it's called Dohoda. Actually, yeah.
Okay.
There was only one like medical center.
Yeah.
It even wasn't there any hospital or anything. And so if someone get ill and they have to travel to like city.
Yeah, so that's quite a long way.
Yes. Yes, and also the service are very different. Like here we have electricity all the time. It never goes off.
Yeah, okay.
And water we can straight away drink it from tap. Like we just get it and drink it. In Iraq we didn't have that. Like sometimes a day we only get like electricity for 3 hours, no more. Yeah.
Okay. So you're still coming from that regional area, you still find that you do have to travel vast distances, but the facilities and the quality of the treatment's a lot better in Australia.
Yes, much better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good.
All right. Thank you so much, Perry and Akram. Akram, what a wonderful story you have, and also seeing the progress that you're making in the regional area, and highlighting the challenges that people settling in regional areas are facing. It is important to pay attention as a community to the significant challenges that Akram mentioned, the limited availability of medical support, educational options that are really important to a newly arrived community members, and how it is to really make a connection with the local community by ensuring that integration is not a one-way street, but a two-way street, by reciprocating that integration process so that we learn from our newly arrived community members as well as they learn from us. Thank you, Akram and Perry, for that wonderful section. Now I'd like to move us to the panel of speakers who are from the NSB regional partners. Can I begin by highlighting the panelists? First up is Jane O'Dwyer. Jane has been a settlement services coordinator and caseworker in a part-time capacity for the past 11 years. Her role is primarily providing settlement-related information, advice, referral casework, and assistance to assess mainstream services for the newly arrived migrant, as well as entrance. Jane is based at Manning Valley Neighborhood Services, which serves the communities of Kempsey, Port Macquarie, Gloucester, Taree, Foster, and also on the East as well as Mid-North Coast. Mena El-Naga is originally from Egypt and has lived experience of migrating to a regional area of Australia. She is a migrant support worker at Connecting Community Services in Double, where she supports migrants and humanitarian entrance through the SETS program, Settlement Engagement and Transition Support. Raquel Aldenate is the CEO of Illawarra Multicultural Services. She oversees the settlement program, SETS, Targeted Early Intervention, NDIS, Community Hubs, and a range of other programs providing services to newly arrived migrants and core communities. Raquel has a background in refugee and migration law and is fluent in English and Spanish. The next is Debbie Carson. Debbie has a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Queensland. She has worked in various roles in the multicultural sector for more than 20 years. She's worked in Newcastle since 2013, starting off with SSI, in both the asylum seeker and multicultural foster care programs and joined NSS in 2017. She is currently the manager of settlement and communities, and Korean is her second language. Can I invite Jane to kick off our contribution to panel discussion? Welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Dor. Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to be speaking on community belonging and social cohesion in a regional context. So social cohesion is the glue that binds a community together, supporting the well-being of its members and creating a sense of belonging for individuals. When we focus on community belonging as workers, we understand the broader community's feelings and perceptions towards the multicultural community can impact a person's capacity to be part of the community. So it is important to consider social cohesion concurrently. So as regional workers, what do we need to consider? There are a number of variables. The vast geography we service and public transport that is limited or sometimes non-existent. This is a significant barrier to a person's capacity to participate in community life. Support networks from other family and cultural groups can be limited or non-existent. While areas may be very diverse, for example, Tare that has people from over 100 different cultures. However, regional areas can lack the ethno-specific cultural groups that provide that sense of community belonging for people. Knowing your area, understanding the demographics. For example, Tare is traditionally a conservative area with a long history of racism towards the Indigenous community, sitting alongside a very diverse multicultural community. And capacity. So as a sole part-time worker, collaboration and partnerships are essential to being able to deliver community development activities. So how do community development activities promote community belonging and social cohesion? They provide opportunities for new arrivals to engage and build connections with the multicultural and the wider community. They provide opportunities for multicultural people to be involved, to participate, to share their culture and contribute to the community. And they also break down cultural barriers and misconceptions in the community. To truly promote community belonging and social cohesion, I believe it is important to be inclusive of everyone, multicultural, Indigenous and mainstream, because we don't live in boxes, we live in a community together, particularly in regional areas. So now I would just like to share some examples of a range of community development activities. Next slide, please. So here we have next slide, thanks. So here we have 2015 Harmony Day event in Tare at the Art Gallery. This was a small event open to the public with several small performances by multicultural and Indigenous community members. To the left, we have Dina from Russia, who you can see, and she's singing in language. That night, a member of a local choir attended, who then invited Dina to join a community choir. To the right, we have a cultural festival. This is a year later. Dina is now a member of and continues to this day to be a member of the community choir and has taught them many Russian songs. This small event made a big difference to Dina, who was very isolated living on a rural property and would literally sing to the cows for company. Next slide, please. So engaging with whole community, from 2014 to 2017, we had capacity to run some small multicultural festivals, again at the gallery. These were great as they engaged all of community, multicultural, Indigenous and mainstream. It was just an informal and fun space to share culture, build connection. People got to participate. They shared their culture with pride. It was a lot of fun. Next slide, please. And that's just people there enjoying the local Irish band. You can just see everyone having a lot of fun. Next slide, please. Connection through sharing. I think sharing of culture is so important. Here to the left, we have a woman from Pakistan. She's just simply demonstrating how to make naan bread. Very simple process. And then everybody had their own piece of naan bread and got to join in and roll it out. It generated so much conversation and engagement between the participants. Next slide, please. Here we have a local Biripi elder. She's sharing some Indigenous painting. Again, simple activity, generating lots of conversation and interaction. Then to the right, we had a woman from Jordan, a Biripi elder, and a local Aboriginal woman who shared their personal stories, creating an understanding of the challenges each face, but at the same time highlighting cultural similarities, building a really genuine connection between the communities. Next slide, please. Breaking down barriers. So in 2013, we held our first youth cultural exchange trip in partnership with Northern Settlement Services. So we had Newcastle students from a migrant and refugee background came to Taree High School for the day, participating in activities with the Taree students. This was a really personal, informal and interactive model, which was very successful in breaking down barriers and building connections between students. So in this photo, you can see the connection and joy from a simple and really spontaneous game of playground soccer. As far as running these exchanges go, we really learnt a lot about that day, about we only really need to keep it simple. They just needed that opportunity to have that interaction. So looking ahead to the future, what do we need? We need more funding as workers to allow them capacity for collaboration and partnership, capacity to facilitate community development activities. These activities provide significant levels at both an individual and community level. And in terms of what they deliver, they provide excellent bang for buck. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Menet from Dubbo now.
Thanks, Jane. Good morning, everyone. So today I will be talking about the visa eligibility and financial support. So in regional areas, many migrants are ineligible for government financial support and other programs due to their visa subclass, which adds more pressure on them and may affect their settlement. Next slide, please. So here's some factors. I will share some factors could affect their settlement. So for the English language, some clients are unable to access adult migrant English program, the AMAB classes, which is very important for migrants and humanitarians entrants to develop their social and life skills. Actually, English is the key service everyone should have access to. Also, it's the key to everything: study, employment, participation in community. There is no allowance for people in their initial settlement to learn English, but it's the basis of everything. So if you are ineligible for Centrelink, it's such a big financial pressure to access this program. Additionally, in regional areas, the AMAP program is not as readily available in metro areas. Also, the classes are only offered 2 days a week in the daytime. So there is little flexibility if you are working. Next slide, please. For the education section, completing studies for newcomers seeking to have their qualification recognized in Australia is very expensive for some migrants, which affect their ability to get a job in their field and the qualification, which leads to financial struggles. Some newcomers unable to access job seeker payments or other relevant support. This can lead to people working in jobs outside of their field of expertise, which are lower skilled and lower paid. This can be very frustrating for people who once had careers and well-paid jobs. Next slide, please. For Centrelink section, there is a few challenges for some visa holders cannot access Centrelink payment due to the newly arrived resident waiting period, the NARWP, which applies for 4 years. During the 4 years, these people could have been working and been taxpayers who lose their job. Like, for example, client on permanent visa who's been in Australia for 2 years, he lost his job and he couldn't access job seeker payment, which makes him struggle financially. So this should be lifted so that people can receive the financial support they need to become financially independent. Next slide, please. And finally, for the health section, so the provision of healthcare services for some migrants who are ineligible for Medicare is necessary because private health insurance is too expensive for them. So those of the challenges that could affect the migrant settlement in regional areas. I will pass on to Raquel from Alwara. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everybody. thank you to the previous speakers for the presentations, very interesting presentations. I just wanted to say that today I'm not actually joining you from the Dharawal country, but rather I'm joining you from the Eastern Kulin Nation, the land of Bunurong, Bunwurrong, and Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people. So I'm not in the land where I usually am. Today we have heard a number of people talking about regional settlement, about the challenges and about the good things around. But the government brief regarding regional settlement is that it offers many humanitarian entrants the chance to rebuild their lives in a safe and friendly environment. So people have spoken about people coming from rural backgrounds and they prefer to live and work in regional communities. There's also the fact that regional settlement is a pathway for many skilled migrants to become permanent residents, and we see that very regularly in our regions. It also provides opportunities for economic growth and prosperity in the regions, which is beneficial for all involved, of course. So I just wanted to talk about two fundamental considerations that I think the previous speakers have spoken about, and so it's repetitive in a sense, but it's important. So one is planning for regional settlement, and the other is appropriate infrastructure, of course. So the key successful to outcomes, I believe, is the recognition of the needs of all involved, including migrants and refugees, and including economic and social needs, not just economic. And that obviously the needs of established communities or the host communities. These concepts, this recognition of the needs of all involved is actually pivotal to the success of regional settlement. Involving the specialized settlement sector in planning is very important, obviously for this recipe to work. Consultation in the regional area regarding their support for the input into the growth in population and the skills required for future growth, and the readiness for the increase in the population should also be part of the equation as a community or a region. We know that if a region is not supportive of new settlers, it will lead to very negative outcomes. And so here is very important the role of settlement workers in raising awareness and advocating for change in attitudes towards newly arrived communities. So infrastructure, obviously, everybody's spoken about the importance of that. And I think Akram talked about services across the spectrum that are needed, such as employment, transport, education, training, and obviously housing. So it is more likely than not that certain infrastructure is less developed in the regions than in the metropolitan area. So that means extra support if there's going to be mutual prosperity. It is clear that an increased population of willing workers can assist to bring economic vibrancy back to regional Australia. But for this to succeed, services and infrastructure in regional areas must be adequate to support increased populations. I think this has been said many times from the previous speakers. So regardless whether that is the situation or not, there has been regional settlement in the regional areas for a long time. And since the early 80s, I think we can see embedded communities in those regions. This is the case for the Illawarra, where IMS is actually sitting. So I just wanted to talk about two issues that also other people have spoken about and that are important for settlements to be successful. I think Akram talked about that as well in his presentation and in his interview, and that is of employment. So we know that the role of settlement services to support clients towards gaining employment and finding creative ways to engage clients into employment pathways has been a role that they played for many years and forever, really, since I can remember, probably from the times when I arrived in this country many years ago. These also include training and education, and they are integral to to have a positive outcome for people. Akram has spoken about that. He has spoken about the difficulties around training, going to, getting training and education in a regional area where they're so far away and they have to spend an awful lot of time traveling to. So in the case of Illawarra Multicultural Services, we have been key in facilitating and supporting the pathways to employment. So historically, IMS has had key involvements in very large campaigns towards equitable employment for women in the region. As an example, in the early days, IMS played a significant role in the campaign to employ migrant women workers at the steelworks in Wollongong in the early 80s. So if you're really interested in knowing the details of that campaign, you can actually watch the film Women of Steel, which it actually tells the story of that campaign and the outcomes at the end of the campaign. A more, though, contemporary story is that the region has a relatively high unemployment rate. And of course, this has an effect on the overall rate of unemployment amongst the newly arrived communities. Employment for newly arrived communities is very challenging, as these new arrivals, refugees and migrants, require extra support and assistance that they do not necessarily find within the established job providers networks. In the delivery of a project called Welcoming Workplaces Pilot Project, we actually have evidence that these clients to succeed require a lot more support, quite specific and tailored support, face-to-face, a lot of time to be able to actually support their individual needs and to assist them in pathways to employment or sustainable employment or meaningful employment, which they don't necessarily receive from the mainstream services. Like I said, sustainable employment is an issue for women, for migrants and refugees. And the creation of opportunities that are sustainable has been on the government's agenda for a while. Success rate, I don't believe it has actually been measured per se. However, it is evident that our services, settlement services, have been pivotal in actually trying to create sustainable employment, sustainable opportunities for employment and supporting clients towards that pathway.
Michelle, can you wrap up on that? We're going to move.
Thank you. So it's become evident to us that the refugee communities have actually set up their own businesses, and we've seen that through the community support program. I'm not going to talk much about that because I've been asked to wrap up. So I'm just going to talk about the other point, which is housing. Housing obviously has been an issue that has affected the whole of Australia, really, all of the states in Australia, particularly affordable housing. There is lack of public housing stock. There's not a lot. There's lengthy waiting periods for public housing. And in regional areas, there's 5 to 10, in some areas more than that. There's limited access to social housing. Housing affordability they're huge issues. The gentrification of regional areas like the Illawarra or Wollongong is in this instance has actually pushed prices up for home buyers and renters. It is common for IMS to be supporting a client who has to vacate the home because it's being renovated, because it's being sold, or it's being demolished, so that new properties can be built. The eviction notices are not due to the inability or the unwillingness of the clients to be paying the rent on a timely basis, but it is rather due to the issues beyond the control, which is obviously, like I said, the gentrification of the areas mostly. This has placed incredible stress on families, and as a result of this, settlement workers have spent an awful lot of time assisting clients with children, single mothers, as Wollongong has been a designated area for women at risk category visas. And then we have a lot of single moms with children who are facing homelessness due to these issues. So in many occasions, there's no successful outcomes and the risk of homelessness is high. So the lack of affordable housing is an issue affecting single mothers in general in our region. But for our clients is obviously a greater probability that they will face homelessness. This issue is considered to be a state-based concern. However, we believe it is important for the federal government to play a vital role in considering this issue as a priority. For us at IMS, out of the 100% of activity and support that we provide clients, say in the last, from August to March, from August 21 and March 2022, we have provided support to about 13% the other way around. The support provided around housing issues has been 13% out of the 100, which I think it's pretty high in terms of the amount of things that settlement workers have to do and other areas that they need to be working on to support communities to settle. So thank you. I'll pass now to Debbie, I believe.
Good idea if I took myself off mute. Thank you very much, Raquel. And I'm joining everybody today from Awabigal land. I'm going to talk about two topics, working in partnerships and regional welcome. Our settlement work with Northern Settlement Services is delivered across 4 locations, as Sharon mentioned earlier: Central Coast, Newcastle, Tamworth and Armadale. So in order to deliver so many programs in so many locations with, in many cases, only one staff member in that location or only a couple of staff, it's necessary to work in partnership with other organisations. In fact, without these partnerships, these activities actually couldn't go ahead at all. There are 3 broad groups of partnerships that I want to talk about. First of all, it's the partnerships with other service providers around events. If we could go to the next slide, please. Just to give an example, this is a photograph of the Central Coast Multicultural Expo that occurred once a year until COVID interrupted, but it's going to be on again this year, where Northern Settlement Services takes the lead in organising it, but other members of the Central Coast Multicultural Interagency actually get involved in the planning committee. So there's usually 5 or 6 different agencies involved in the planning committee. 20 Central Coast Multicultural Interagency members would attend the program and be involved in helping to run it. And there's another 30 to 40 service providers. So usually there's about 60 different service providers involved in the Expo. That partnership is vital to be able to make that event be able to go ahead. Another example of a partnership around events is the Unity and Diversity Festival in Newcastle, which is led by STARTS, but various agencies, including Northern Settlement Services, are very involved in helping with the planning and organising, contributing funding and a lot of in-kind support to make it happen, along with active community members that from our multicultural communities, groups and so on that get involved. So these events are possible through that partnership. Another kind of partnership, next slide, please. Another kind of partnership are those that are programs that we're actually able to run in partnership with other service providers. And I'd have to say that in Newcastle here, our multicultural youth networks are probably the most organised and collaborative groups that we have in the region. The multicultural youth group is run every week from 3 to 5:30, and as you can see from the flyer there, STARTS and NSS are involved in leading it. But then we have University of Newcastle, Headspace, Catholic Care Refugee Hub, Multicultural Neighbourhood Centre and North Lakes Youth Services all involved, along with some other partners that visit and participate as well through Samaritans, through Newcastle Police and so on. So that activity is able to occur on a weekly basis with that wide range of involvement with partners. In terms of the youth sector in Newcastle, there's a range of activities they run. So the Multicultural Neighbourhood Centre leads the Welcome Ride activity a couple of times every year. The bike safety program is run by the Catholic Care Refugee Hub. There's the Youth Nations has just been started by Hunter Multicultural Communities, and then Northern Settlement Services is leading the Young Adults group and also the youth exchange programs. So the collaboration and working together is really important in order to make these kind of programs work. Another example of a program that we've worked very closely on was our COVID response last year, where we had Newcastle Police, Hunter New England Health Multicultural Unit, Northern Settlement Services, Hunter Multicultural Communities and STARTS running a weekly COVID information session for our active community members and community leaders. So that was that was a really important partnership that allowed us to do a great deal of work and reach a very wide range of people within the community, and no one of us could run that program on our own. The third kind of partnership, next slide please, is those partnerships that we have with organisations that are volunteer organisations. And there's two that I'd like to give as an example of these kind of partnerships, where in both of them in Armadale, these examples, the Rotary Club of Armadale has partnered with Northern Settlement Services in our regional employment agricultural project. And that joint project is giving Yazidi community members from Iraq who've come to Armadale the opportunity to use and adapt their existing farming skills to the Armadale climate and situation. And so they've had the opportunity to grow vegetables, to have mentoring from Rotary community members. A couple of Rotary farmers have actually donated the land that the agricultural activity is occurring on. Northern Settlement Services is helping with project management, with linking to other services and training opportunities and so on, providing bilingual support and a range of other ways. And this program is something we've got a bigger vision for, and we're hoping to get more funding for, but that partnership with the Rotary Club of Armadale is vital to the success of that program. Another really important partnership for us with a volunteer organisation is with Armadale Sanctuary, and we've worked with Armadale Sanctuary for 20 years in that region with running a range of programs. The Armadale Homework Centre was set up in partnership with Armadale Sanctuary and the Department of Education originally, but the most recent partnership has been where the Armadale Sanctuary was able to raise money for the Digital Connections project that was mentioned earlier. Akram actually worked on with us. They were fantastic fundraisers, able to inspire people with the vision, having recognised the need for having digital connections training, digital literacy increased, but then didn't actually have the capacity to employ a worker. So Northern Settlement Services became the employer for the worker, and then together we ran that project. So it's been a great opportunity to work in partnership on that as well. So the value and importance of these partnerships, it's great that we're able to deliver wonderful programs with our multicultural communities, and that the staffing and resources of bringing people together in partnership is part of what's able to make that happen. The other aspect I wanted to talk about was the community welcome and support. In regional areas, we're really known for our warm welcome of people's care and concern for their neighbour, looking out for people. And that is extended generously to our community members from migrant and refugee backgrounds as well. It isn't always done eloquently. It's not always done. It's not always politically correct. But the welcome is there, and people learn from each other in the process, and fantastic relationships are built. It's overwhelmingly that we hear stories like Akram's of feeling welcomed and connected into the community. In Newcastle, we've got a long waiting list of volunteers from our mainstream community who are keen to get involved in supporting our newly arrived communities. There's lots of practical support that's been made available with the in the face of last year's evacuations from Afghanistan. We had a large number of people come here to Newcastle, and the local community raised tens of thousands of dollars in a very short space of time to support those evacuees on arrival. So that kind of community support and community welcome is very strong in our regional communities. I think regional communities sometimes get a bad name for perhaps not welcoming migrants and refugees, but for the most part, that's a long way from reality. I think regional media has an impact. A small story can become a big story very easily in a regional area. And it's very sad to hear the negative stories that sometimes are perpetrated about what's going on in regional areas, when there's actually a lot of great things happening, and those good news stories don't get heard. So one of the great news stories that I'd like to wrap up with is that in Tamworth, can we go to the next slide? In Tamworth, our Karen, Filipino and Vietnamese communities have now spent 8 years being actively involved in Clean Up Australia, and as a result of that, Tamworth Regional Council has offered them a park that they can call a multicultural park and adapt the way that they want to as part of that symbol of welcome to the Tamworth community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie, and thanks to all the panelists. This is your opportunity as audience to ask questions And to summarize some of the key discussions that have come out of this panel. The first speaker, Jane, spoke about the need to support regional partners in delivering support and connection to the local communities through cultural events, to interfaith or inter-school dialogue. And Mena talked about the need for elevating the visa eligibility so that people that come to regional centers can be able to access a variety of services that could be able to allow them to support their engagement in the community rather than on visa eligibility. And Raquel spoke about the importance of housing and employment as interface to supporting people to connect and become belong to that particular community that they settle in. And finally, the last contribution from Debbie focuses on partnerships and the strength that can be provided again in that trifecta that was mentioned earlier around connecting with communities, as well as connecting with services and volunteer organizations, and the role of the settlement services, the specialized settlement services, in being able to support that connection and partnership to work and to strengthen the settlement of newly arrived people. So I'll leave it now to the audience to ask questions, and I'm going to go with one question that's already here, just to read it out to you, the panelists. Thank you, Jane, for sharing some example of activities that bring Indigenous people together with people from migrant and refugee backgrounds. These types of intercultural activities are very important. Are you or any of other panelists aware of any efforts to involve Indigenous people in regional settlement in a deeper way? For example, by incorporating traditional owners' perspective into regional settlement decision-making and planning process. Jane, do you want to start? And then I'll hand it to anyone after that. Jane.
Thanks, Dor. No, I'm not aware of anything at a higher level regarding settlement. The activities that I've been involved in have all been locally driven from partnerships that were started many years ago when we saw that Harmony Day was seen as an Indigenous affair and not as a joint affair in it, and it really has just snowballed from there, the activities that we've run as we locally saw that is important. But at a higher level, looking at settlement, no, I'm not aware of anything, but I think it would be great.
Anyone else on the panel? In your...
I'm not aware of anything at that level of involving an actual regional settlement decision making and processes. That would be wonderful if that was part of what was able to occur. I do know that here in Newcastle, every time we have our Unity and Diversity Festival, the walk is led by our First Nations people, and there is a smoking ceremony and a welcome to country that is integral to that event. And also that there's a NAIDOC Week associated bridge walk that occurs in Armadale for the First Nations communities, and the Yazidi community in Armadale have been very active in engagement in that activity and been actively involved. There's some beautiful photographs of an Aboriginal elder and an Yazidi elder walking together over that bridge that's been around in the community. But yeah, some great symbolic and connected activities, but not that higher level involvement in decision making in the deeper way that you're asking, Natasha.
Likewise, in the Illawarra, actually for IMS, it's been similar. We have had activities with elders teaching young people, going in camping type of activities, done some programs around this in the schools with Indigenous young people involvement too, but not at the level that you are asking, which I think it is pivotal, obviously, in terms of planning, because they're very, we in the land, so in Indigenous land, therefore, obviously, they should really be part of the discussion.
Such an important question, really, that goes to the core of connecting. If we are to connect, we need to start from the grassroots all the way to decision-making level? I think that's a very good question, and thank you for asking that question. I have a question for Jane and maybe also Mena to answer. We've seen the significant placed on community capacity and the impact that has on the local community as well as on the client that settle in the areas that they settle in regional areas. But there is a consistent lack of support that is in terms of resources put into regional capacity building. What do you see as a key need for the regional communities to be able to get that support that is needed to resource the community capacity building in regional areas?
I think that the capacity building takes quite a lot of time because the communities are so dispersed. It's not like we can go to an elder or a group and have that conversation and plan something and what they would like to do. So engaging people is time consuming, and what do people want? What are they interested in? What will work for them? So it takes a lot of time to build those connections. Funding cuts quite a few years back reduced, that reduces hours, it reduces capacity. So I think people are looking for that and they embrace when the opportunity comes along. But it takes a lot of time from us as workers. Not only do we need to talk to services, but to talk to people that are so scattered is really challenging.
Anna?
Yeah, I will not add more for what Jane said, but yeah, it just taking time when you're just working to build and talk to people. But it's really, as Jane said, I'll not add more than that.
Great. So it takes time, and it's through a diverse, dispersed communities. I don't see any other question, and we are really out of time. We would really like to thank and appreciate your contribution as panelists, but also would like to thank the audience for tuning in and asking those questions. I would like now to turn our attention to David Wilden, who will be providing a keynote address on the vision of regional settlement from a government perspective or a departmental perspective. David is the first Assistant Secretary for Refugee, Humanitarian, Settlement Division of the Department of Home Affairs. I'd like now to welcome David Wilden to the floor.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Am I being heard? Sorry. Yes, excellent, because I've just had a few delays, so I do apologise for that. Thank you very much for the invitation today. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land here in Canberra, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The question of a vision for regional settlement is as broad and as deep, I guess, as we want it to be. In a previous life, I ran migration policy, so I'm well aware of the issues around skilled workers, temporary workers, and the opportunities and challenges there. And obviously, at the moment, I head up the Refugee, Humanitarian and Settlement Division, which sees us have quite a strong focus on regional settlement. I think we're hampered in some respects purely and simply by the fact that governments make decisions on how we define things. So when we look at regional settlement, we count numbers. We're actually, personally, I think we start from the wrong place when you carve out areas like Perth, Adelaide, Hobart and Canberra. They're considered regional, whereas I think for most other things we consider them cities, urban, etc. So you can have a better cities initiative from the Department of Infrastructure being done in a town that's a regional town or city. So there is a lot of challenge in determining, when we look at numbers, when we say we want 50% of refugees settling in regional areas, when you include Perth, Adelaide, Hobart and Canberra, all you're saying is 50% will be in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane and 50% will be elsewhere. So I think we need to think carefully around that. In terms of the focus as well, there are those things the government can control, such as refugee placement through the settlement program. But SHP, for example, people will tend to go where their family links are, and certainly underskilled, that comes down to being sponsored by an employer, then obviously you'll go where that employer's job is. So government doesn't control all the levers around regional settlement. But I think what we do need to have is a much better sense of what good policy looks like for regional settlement across the spectrum of migration, and then look at how do we actually make sure that we don't either trip each other up or create problems for another part of government, and particularly for local communities, by decisions that are made. Obviously, the program size in the ref and hum space, program size is a key element, depending on how you split the refugee or the SHPs. Jobs and economy, all those basic things like local infrastructure, can be both an impediment to settlement and an opportunity for settlement. We often talk about that issue of you don't want to put too many people into too small a place because, you know, the local economy, there won't be jobs or there won't be schooling or healthcare. And yet the reverse argument is the better we get at providing, you know, people into certain locations will actually be the reason a school stays open or adds another teacher or perhaps adds a new healthcare facility. So there is that issue, and it's a Commonwealth, state and local government issue around how we join up the issues of economic drivers, local infrastructure, service provision, and what the movement of migrants, or for that matter, Australians are, because obviously it's not done, migrant movements are not done in isolation. I think it also is really important from the government in setting any vision to look at where we've come from and where we think we're going. Certainly where we've come from, we can point in the refugee humanitarian space to many instances of outstanding outcomes for the settlement of refugees. You look, some have been mentioned today, obviously. You've got the Yazidis in Armadale. The Karen people in Nil in Victoria are a wonderful success story of how a group of people ended up in a town not particularly forced or guided by government, and have ended up, that town has grown, the businesses have grown, the supply chain has grown around, you know, the poultry industry where they are working. And yet we also see secondary movement in a lot of places where we can't quite sell that success story. And a recent example of that is we settled a number of Yazidi people in Mount Gambier, and they have almost all left within 2 years and moved to Toowoomba. So what are those issues of stickability? Are they ethnically specific? Are they related to the support that's available on the ground? The support that we can provide through our service provision, be it local or at a state government level. They're all factors that I think we need to think very carefully about. The concept of linked and unlinked arrivals, where people have links, they can move into communities that they know, and I was listening in earlier, you know, and listening to the experience of, you know, the smiling face, or being able to get an answer in your mother tongue because English language is not yet at a point where you feel comfortable engaging more broadly on your own. How do we make sure that we leverage off those opportunities without going to the other extreme where we are only putting certain ethnicities in certain places, getting that balance around it? Now, again, I'll keep bouncing back and forward. That's really easy when you have programs where we control the levers, more of a challenge where we don't. Our skilled migrants come primarily from a small number of countries. You know, over 50% of skilled migrants come from China, India, the UK, America, Philippines. Once you get past that, you're getting down to very small numbers. So they're often coming from English-speaking, nearly 40%, I think it is, come from predominantly English-speaking countries. And they also have to pass, if they're coming into the school program, English language tests. So it is quite a different paradigm. So the support services you need are different. Probably the closest parallel we have is partner visas, where the partner visas or the partner of the skilled visa don't have to meet an English language requirement, and they can often suffer isolation. I did hear earlier, you know, the comments about the lack of access to services for some migrants, and we have to work out, while there is withholding periods for certain visa categories for some people, that doesn't mean they can't access, community services as opposed to Centrelink payments. How do we make sure we get those connections strengthened so when people come in, they know what's available in their local community, they know what's available through certain providers who they can either purchase from or do pro bono, whatever that might be, without saying the only answer is access to a Centrelink payment. If you come here knowing you won't have access to Centrelink payments for 4 years, it's not going to be helpful to say, but I don't have, therefore I can't. You come knowing that. How do we make sure we link them up to services, particularly if they don't have English skills to a level which means they can have a degree of independence? I heard an interesting comment earlier about AMEP not being available. AMEP is very broadly available, but people perhaps don't know when they can access it. We've just introduced recently the new AMEP online program, so that means there is literally no barrier because anyone can access the online service. But there are issues around classes, how often classes are, depending on your location, which can be a limiting factor, and I totally accept that. Some of the changes the government made last year, we've seen over 10,000 people re-enter the AMEP program who had previously dropped out because we've opened up the scope for people to join. And I think that's a very positive thing, and we should make sure that message is getting out there. The other thing I think we need to try to do systemically across the NGO sector, state, local government, is develop a better understanding of arrivals, aspirations, goals, capabilities. I think in the refugee space, for example, we've seen the traditional service model that we use for people coming with, very little English, very little education. It's a very different experience at the moment with the Afghans who have come because they are a different cohort. Still refugees, still in need of protection, but often highly educated, often with good or adequate English language skills. Many of them are saying, thanks for the house, but I really want to work. How do I work? And they want settlement service providers. Most of these are in Victoria at the moment. 54% of those that have arrived are in Victoria. We are getting the message of the way of what would have been a more traditional settlement path, where perhaps the self-efficacy of individuals wasn't as strong as in this group. But I think what it highlights is we need to know where we can gather that information, more about migrants who are arriving, and how do we make sure that we get better in the earliest stages? So from the department, we interview people for refugee visas. That's a perfect opportunity to learn more about what their own, if you like, self-motivations are, what their capability is, what they're bringing to the table, what they expect in that first year or so. So we, from the department, can pass to settlement providers better information to help those initial weeks and months where we don't have to start learning once people arrive, because you establish a pattern of behaviour in those first few months. And if the pattern of behaviour we're establishing is around paternalism and not promoting self-efficacy, then that's a real issue that we're going to have to look at. The other thing, of course, is how do we make sure that people who are coming know their rights but know their obligations. That's across the spectrum of migrants arriving. It's sort of almost counterintuitive that refugees who come here with nothing, who know nobody. Was that?
I think we lost you, David.
Okay, am I back?
You're back now.
Okay, all right, thank you. I was just saying, I think one of the things we need to look at, going to that point of people's ambitions, etc., also comes down to what do they understand about their own rights and their responsibilities. So what do we expect from people in terms of them stepping in? and also people, and I was reading some stuff earlier today talking, about how some people, I don't have English, but I worked in an agrarian economy, so I can garden. And then they set up gardening. I think that's happening in Armadale in one place, but that's quite a regular thing where we know people are prepared to step up. How do we help them step up through community involvement and through the right assistance? We have a national settlement framework which works very effectively, I think, in framing the needs that we need to manage through education and training, employment, health and wellbeing, housing, language services, transport, civic participation, family and social support. However, do we know that most migrants who aren't refugee entrants actually have the capacity to understand that settlement is very similar in terms of those elements, education, training, etc. How do we make sure they get those links into there? And one of the discussions we've been having here in the department between the Coordinator General and myself, and noting the Coordinator General finishes up on Thursday, is taking a couple of months' leave, so I will be the Coordinator General as well as my day job, so I'll have a conversation with myself. How do we look at migrant services from the Commonwealth perspective more broadly? The Coordinator General's role is for migrant services, but has had a very strong focus on refugees and humanitarian entrants, and a little broadly touching on things like English language. But there is a real issue there that comes to social cohesion and acceptance that we need to look at. Is the government doing enough, and are we helping local communities, local governments, charities, etc., be able to access, know where those services are and access them? One of those real challenges, I think, goes back to my earlier point. The government has made decisions around a number of payments that people can't have. That can be a limiting factor, or it can be something that kicks us into other lanes in terms of what people can do. The other thing we need to look at from the ref and hum space in particular is our current patterns of settlement in regional Australia. And we've been doing some work and talking to service providers around the concept of hub and spoke. The issue we often are concerned around is I think one of the interviews earlier was touching on this, the travel that might be required if you get too far away from primary place of education, so a TAFE outlet or a college or healthcare, specialist services, etc. If we get better at that earlier issue of knowing more about the migrant who is coming, we are better able to target what the provision of service might look like and where it can be delivered from. If you have people with a high degree, they're self-starters, they don't have a particular problem going to a rural area because they don't have any connections here anyway, they're happy to start at the beginning and go from there. There may be opportunities for us to set up in smaller communities, so think of them as satellite towns, a way that may not have the full range of facility, but if the person doesn't need the full range of facility on a day-to-day basis, really, how is that different than an Australian citizen who will at various times need emergency medical or particular medical care if they develop cancer or if they have psychological issues? That is no different than a refugee's journey. So as opposed to carving out refugees as different, let's accept that they will have many of the challenges that other people do, and some specific ones. Where they have specific challenges, it means they need to be close to torture and trauma counselling. We should make that so. But if that's not a requirement, we can look at, and I'll cite some of the things we're looking at in New South Wales. If the hub's Wagga, we can look at places like, Griffith, Junee, etc. If the hub is Canberra, we can look at Queanbeyan, Cooma, Goulburn, all an hour and a half's drive away. Newcastle, you've got Lake Macquarie, Maitland, Port Stephens. So they're thinking differently around the locations for settlement, looking at that issue of how services are provided, but then linking that back onto the issue of not everyone needs the same high level of service. People need different levels of service based on their own individual circumstance. How do we get better at that planning? And it comes back to some of my earlier comments around knowing at a far earlier phase of our engagement what people's individual circumstances are. I might pause there, and I've noticed some comments coming up. There's certainly some of these echoing the concern that there may be filtering certain people out based on matters other than need. I can give you a guarantee that when people are coming in for a humanitarian interview, we gather information at the moment, and that information is used for many purposes. My proposition is not that we would be using this to filter people in or out, because we are assessing the humanitarian need. More a case of, if we know more, it will help us understand service provision, and it might actually help us understand, actually, you'd be better off in a different place upon arrival, because they have services that are better suited towards your individual need. We would not use any of the information we gather about someone's plans in Australia or about their life goals in any way that would help determine a visa decision for them. That is made on completely different grounds. So I can give you that assurance. And information on rights has also popped up. That is absolutely the case. And this is that challenge of how do we make sure people know their rights? We have TIS runs out of my division as well. If people, obviously the cost of translating every piece of information governments have into multiple languages can be significant. What we need to do is make sure people know where to look. If they have English language, or they have community members with suitable English who can help explain it, or if not, making sure that people have access to TIS as well. Noting the English language, lack of childcare, lack of capacity and equipment, totally get that. And I can only say watch this space, because we are about to go out to tender for new service provision. So that's going to be an opportunity to do things a bit differently as well. I also think there's a point here, thank you, around cultural assimilation needs to be upfront, and they're often ignored. Strongly agree with that. And I think where it comes down to is, at the moment, I think we do it well in some parts, and it's completely ignored in other parts, because, you know, the government has a view that if you're coming under a certain visa category, and let's use an example, I never get it right, I think it's the temporary skill shortage visa now. It used to be the 457, but people come on that, and really, because they're a temporary visa holder, we don't really think about cultural assimilation, we don't really think about social cohesion, because they're only here for a temporary period, except that a large number of those end up coming on to permanent visas. So if we're not focusing there, people are going to, if you like, learn maybe the wrong thing, struggle with assimilation because they are on a temporary visa, they don't feel part of it. And then 3 years down the track, they may actually become a permanent resident and a citizen. And we've missed that opportunity. And if you've got those learned behaviours, or that's your experience in those early days, have we actually lost the opportunity? Because when we move to that permanent residency phase, we don't tend to look back at what's gone before. So that itself will also be a challenge. But I think I've spoken for my allotted time, and I've tried to pick up a few of the comments coming in. But if there are any particular questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you for that, and for sharing the insights around how we can approach regional settlement now and into the future. One of the key things that was mentioned earlier that I would like to get your perspective on, and touched a little bit of it just then, is the eligibility for a variety of different visa categories, and the need to open up that, because you've done that in the AMP by getting rid of the visa eligibility. Is this the way forward for the settlement services?
Thanks, Dor. Look, I think we're going to bring out a discussion paper very shortly, which is really, what is the future of settlement services? So rather than me tell you my thinking, what I want to hear from is your thinking and the community's thinking. And while obviously the framing of that comes out of the settlement program that we currently do, the questions and what we'll do in a lot of the community engagement will be broader than that, because we do want to know if we are missing a trick by only focusing settlement services on what is a contracted service that SSI or AIMS or someone do for a defined cohort of people. My proposition is we're missing a great opportunity. and there should be perhaps a broader view on settlement. And this is not going to be bound by, the discussion is not going to be bound by what will the government pay for. Our settlement frameworks should look very broadly at what does good settlement look like, what service provision should be available. Then the question comes down to what does the government pay for at the national level, at the state level, the territory level, at the local level, or what do we ask people to pay for themselves? You know, if people know that service is available, where they can join community groups, and a lot of our multicultural institutes engage in this anyway, they're funded, and then they use that funding to set up programs to access people. How do we make sure that's all based on a commonly understood framework of what good settlement looks like? And how do we make sure the accessibility is there for anyone who wants to access? And for people who aren't engaged, how do we make sure that they know it's there? How do we promote it so that anyone not engaged in it is doing it for a very good reason, because they don't need it, because they're working and they're engaged and they're doing their social, the assimilation is happening through the local soccer club, and that does the trick. So the discussion paper is currently with the Minister for clearance. It's very short and really it's more about questions. But really what we want to do is we'll come out and have a lot of face-to-face meetings, but we're seeking submissions and discussions so that we can be very clear on what a future model could look like. Now, we'll wait and see what governments say about how far they want to take it, but the opportunity which comes along about once every 3 to 5 years should be taken up. And I'm just noticing some things coming out. It should be seen in the broad. I absolutely agree to that. The issue is we shouldn't be bound by the fact that, well, it all comes down to who pays for what. Let's set a framework and a communication process that means everyone is aware. And then what sits under that is service provision through a number of mechanisms ranging from Commonwealth, state, territory, through to local NGOs or charities or whatever that might be. But we're all reading the same book, we're all singing the same song, so that the actual settlement outcomes can be achieved in a more seamless way than perhaps they are at the moment.
I think that collaboration and that specification of roles and responsibility would be very critical, given the comments that is made in the chat around who pays for what and who gets involved in what. That is where the critical mass is. I have a question down in the chat from someone. Nelly has put in the chat about one of the main challenges for people on family stream visas in regional areas is knowing there are services available and how to access these services and what this process looks like. How can we make sure isolation language or awareness and the power and control do not impede the settlement process for these cohorts of people?
Yeah, look, I think it's partly what I've touched on. At the moment, I don't think we have a singular view of how settlement should be done. So it often comes down to the goodwill of some people. It comes down to the positive or negative relationships that develop at the various levels of government. And I'll give you an example that I have invested very heavily in a group called SOSOG, which is basically the settlement organisations at the state territory level with the Commonwealth. And we've done probably 3 times the amount of meetings this year to talk about how do we work together, how do we get joined up policy, how do we understand who's delivering what. Now, the next level, we've also got the local government are represented on SOSOG as well. The next opportunity is building up the NGO dialogue, which I run in the Ref and Hum space, to make sure those participants in the NGO dialogue are also linking in with state and territories. At the moment, it's been too segmented. And because it's segmented, people fall through the cracks. Services are not available. It's very easy for me to say if migrants writ large are selling in a small country town, that's Multicultural New South Wales or Justice New South Wales, whoever, it's their job to make sure, because they're settling in your community, they're not settling in the Commonwealth, they're settling in your local community. But that's a cop-out because the Commonwealth obviously has a role there. We pay, providers, $250 million a year in funds to do settlement services. We also pay through other grants through, social cohesion, our social cohesion multicultural area, to other groups to make sure we are making those connections on the ground between communities, between different ethnicities with different language barriers. So the particular issue you raised, I think, is a microcosm of these larger issues around how do the three layers of government work more effectively together? What are the frameworks we work against? And what is our level of understanding around the commitments that are being made at each of those levels, so that I know I should have visibility in New South Wales of where the latest initiatives that New South Wales State Government are going to be focused on that is going to address some of the social cohesion needs in a certain town. My guys here should know that because they're doing other work that might be in that town as well. So if I don't know you're doing that, how do I know my services are complementing it as opposed to distracting from it? So and we have to own that as the Commonwealth and at the state level. I think we've made really good progress over the last 12 months, and I hope to make more over the next 12 months.
Thank you. We're running out of time, but we do have two questions that you can make your passing remarks on before you go. One is around the need for a full community approach, and two is around the language support or interpreting that is removed from settlement support. And the last one is, how will the future of settlement discussion paper be shared?
I'll work back from the last one. So it'll go up on the web. We'll be promoting it out to all of our, interlocutors and colleagues through the SSI, HSP, SETS providers, etc. So we will be pushing that out as broadly as we can. And then again, we'll be saying, look on the website, and that's where we'll have updates on consultations, etc. It won't be, obviously, we're not going to be able to get out to a lot of regional areas. We're going to try to do a couple of regional meetings, but we only have a window of opportunity to get out and have those. But what we can do is obviously accept as many submissions as possible. With the issue of interpreting services, again, one of the challenges is what the government does or doesn't fund and who can or can't use it in terms of paying or free. That does have a multi-layered effect in terms of us and the state governments, but it also has other parts of the Commonwealth determine that. Again, AMEP and TIS are within my remit now. And we are going to look at, off the back of the AMEP reforms, we are going to look at in sort of probably not the immediate future because we've got a few other things on, but a bit further down the track, starting to look at things like FIS and who qualifies for the free interpreting service as opposed to having to use TIS, translating, interpreting, and who pays. That's a bit further down the track. What we have to do is get out into the market in the first instance around AMEP, and then we'll look at some of the other policy questions that'll come.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, David, and I appreciate your time today. We've run a little bit over time, but do acknowledge that this was a very engaging audience, as well as the topic of itself is important to the regional providers and also to the stakeholders that deliver services in the regional area. We are running out of time, so I will call us back here at 12:08. If we can resume at 12:08, we'll have a break now and resume at 12:08 to continue the last part of our day. We will have about 45 minutes then to wrap up the day. So you have time to stretch, grab a coffee, drink, wherever, and we'll resume here. Thank you very much. It's been a terrific morning. All right, make a comeback. Hopefully everyone has freshened up. Short toilet break, glass of water, coffee, tea, whatever that fits your refreshment. Well, that was a wonderful morning. I certainly enjoyed the different speakers that we've had today. And it has come from all angles, from professional to government to, you know, newly arrived people, as well as the services that we deliver. In going forward and moving ahead, I would like now to introduce to you Arun Nepal, who is working as a COVID frontliner at Double Showground, and he's a client of Connecting Community Services, to share his experiences. Arun will be supported by Mena, who will work with him to ask similar questions to the one that we had with Akram and Perry. So welcome Arun and Mena. Mena, are you there?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So did you hear us? Yes. Yeah. So we welcome Arun. We welcome Arun to our regional settlement conference. Arun is originally from Nepal, and he has been in Australia for 3 years. He's here in Australia with his wife, and he will give us like some experience about his settlement in Double. Hi, Arun, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Arun, we need to know like more about your experience in Double. So can you tell me like when you first come to Double, what were your first impression?
So I came in the 2021, July 20, I think. Yeah, it's July 20, 2021. And when I come here, like it was like the quiet place, and it was a nice place. And when I came here, I just visited one shop, and it was like the friendly, because like I didn't get the chance to know everything about when I previously worked in the Sydney. Like I used to work in the Sydney for the 1 year, and I didn't get that chance. But when I come over here, like everyone is asking about how are you, and like so they are so friendly and so kindly also. And
yeah, so people is friendly here.
friendly,
yeah, it's very quiet and friendly. Yeah. So what do you like about living in Double?
like we can give the time for the friend, family, and everything. Like we can manage the time. You can work for some time, and you can like get for your income also, and you can have your pleasure time also. You can have a time with the family also, friend also, and everything.
Yeah, so you have a time to
Yeah,
spend with your
everything.
family. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Are there any challenges for you or your family because of living in the regional area?
It's only about the housing only.
The housing, yeah, I think the housing is a problem in everywhere, just not only in Double. Yeah, yeah.
Because like my wife is living in the Sydney right now because of the visa like not from the visa conditions. She is studying nursing over there, and I'm just applying for the 491 visa. That's why I came here. Like we are doing like she transfer to the student, and I'm also a student. So I came here. Like we are trying to manage everything. So if I got the housing over here, so I'm doing the application and everything.
Yeah,
no
yeah, hopefully, yeah. So what's your hopes for you and your family to be here in Double?
It's a nice place because like there is no rush. Like if you can manage your time, we can do everything over here Double. Like you can plan for the business, you can plan for everything. Like career wise also, if you choose this place, then it's a nice place, I think.
Yeah, it's very friendly because everyone know each other here in Double. Like it's
I'm working in the COVID center right now, and like everyone coming to there, and like they are sharing the problem, and they are sharing the like I have this problem while coming over here. Like they are friendly.
Hmm.
We can't see in any other place like that.
Yeah, people here, yeah, and being like familiar with
everyone know me
different
over there,
multicultural. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and what the difference? Did it make the settlement service provider like ours? Like how the difference?
I'm having so much help from them. Like I don't know how to drive, and I didn't do the DKT also. For the learner driver license also, I need to do the DKT. But when I called the Mina and she helped me through that process also, she contact another person and they helped me to do the DKT. I got the learner license right now, and she also tell another person to like for the teaching for the driving lesson also. Now they have contacted me. I'm just planning my schedule also according to that.
Yeah, so we're helping Aaron and just like getting his driving license to make his
And
life more
settlement
easier.
and
Yeah, some referrals.
like
So
for the housing also, she helped me so much.
Oh yeah, that's okay. So we're trying to help him, and get him settled and just like getting the driving license soon. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. So what about the timing, Sophia? We still have time?
Maybe we can open it up to people online to ask questions, and I'm delighted to hear that you are making your settlement journey a lot easier through the help of connecting community services, but also finding it easy to manage your lifestyle in a regional area. You have a bit more time to spend with family. You have support and friendliness of the community that's welcoming you. And I think that's what we need, a welcoming community with support from services, and be able to work around your family and settle there. My question to you is, what is your long-term goal in the regional center, and how can services support you to achieve that long-term goal?
So this question is for me.
Yeah, so real life.
Because when I came here, like I came like 2021, and I'm engaged with the cricket team also and football team also. And in cricket team in Dubbo, there are lots of people they are from the Pakistan, India, like not from the Asia only, like they are from the European country also. I'm just engaged with them also. And I work in the multi-place because I work in the Nepalese shop, I work in the Bangladeshi shop, I work with the Aussie also. Like I want to know the culture, because if you exchange your culture, like like in Nepal, momo is famous. And I work in the histopath, they all are Aussies. I invite them in my home to like when I make the momo, because I want to like exchange the culture. They came here and they eat the momo, they like it, because I want to make the friend all over. Like when I will stay here for the 10 or 15 years, I don't know, but still I'm here. So that's, I want to make the friend. I have the lots of friend over here, like the Aussies also, like the Lebanese also.
Yeah.
Like I think Lebanese, there are 13 family only in the Dubbo. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what momo is dumplings.
Yeah, dumplings. Yeah.
Yummy dumplings.
Yeah.
So what Arun is saying, that he's trying to exchange his culture so that people know his culture, but also learning from people.
Because if I teach them how to make the dumpling, they can teach what they know about their culture. That's the main thing. If I give something, they have to give something. Like if you are the good friend, then we can do something like that. I know I'm just trying to make everyone friend. I go to the cricket club also, football club also. If I got some time, I'll just roam around the Dubbo Square and the Riverdale to meet some friend.
Yeah, so sharing culture is
sharing culture
very powerful.
Very nice,
yeah, very good. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mena and Arun. I wish you all the best, and hopefully I will be in Dubbo sometimes and eat some momo dumplings with you.
Yeah.
You can just come directly to my home. You don't have to go anywhere else.
Yeah, you can invite me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
All right, we'll now turn our attention to Debbie Carson and Simone Souters. Simone is from social planners, or is a social planner for the city of Newcastle. She's going to share insight from the called social network analysis of Newcastle. Please welcome back Debbie and Simone.
Thanks, Dor. Hello, everybody. Just checking everybody can hear me okay. It's all good. Yeah, awesome. Just checking, you never know, working from home, internet issues, it's always a joy. Yes, look, hello, I'm Simone. As Dor introduced me, I'm a social planner at the City of Newcastle Council. So I work in the local government. And yeah, we're here to talk to you today with Debbie about a piece of research that we did last year in collaboration with the local multicultural community services sector, of which Northern Settlement Services was an expert advisor who helped us with that research, but we actually worked with many organisations in the Newcastle region, in the greater Newcastle region, on that research. And I'm just going to do a really quick 10-minute presentation. And to be very good about time, I'm going to time myself because, you know, give myself 10 minutes and then give Debbie 5 or a bit more minutes as well, because we're going to partner on this presentation. Fantastic. All right, so maybe the next slide, please. So just quickly to say that I'm calling in from a Awabakal country today, here in Newcastle. And I guess what I just like to say, of course, express my respect for elders past, present and emerging, and those that are on the call with us today, but also to acknowledge the thousands and thousands and thousands of years of knowledge and culture that we are so privileged to be a part of here in Australia. And I guess it's in that spirit of learning that, you know, myself as a researcher, I'm constantly trying to work, but also today. So thank you to the organisers for all the learning we've had. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, I'd like to start with a project overview. So just to explain to you what this research was about and a few of the findings. Then, as I mentioned, Debbie will give a little bit more insights and reflections on the process as well. So next slide, please. In terms of the research objectives, and I'm going to explain what social network analysis is in a moment, but basically we did something called social network analysis complemented with some qualitative research. So what we were trying to understand was how do the network of organizations that provide services to people of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, how are they working together to meet community needs? And what are the opportunities for improvement or strengthening? So please note here that we're talking about the broader culturally and linguistically diverse communities. And we're talking about organizations that are multicultural or called specific, but also that are not. So it was broader in that sense. Next slide, please. So just to explain a little bit, the research was commissioned by us, the City of Newcastle Council, but we worked in collaboration with 3 researchers, Dr. Jennifer Waterhouse, Dr. Robin Keast, and Hannah Murphy, who are associated with the University of Newcastle and Southern Cross University, and as I mentioned, expert input from Northern Settlement Services. Next slide, please. And also just one point to make with that research that we did, it was actually a pilot from the City of Newcastle to use social network analysis with the view to perhaps use social network analysis for other sectors in Newcastle. So that could be the housing sector, that could be the domestic and family violence sector, community services, that is. So I just wanted to give that broader context as well. And we were very fortunate to work with the called community sector as a pilot. So what is social network analysis? So next, if you could just press next because it gives some more information. So basically, as I mentioned, it's a research methodology that actually focuses on the connections and relationships that exist between entities, such as people or organizations. So we've talked a lot today about collaboration and the importance of collaboration, and social network analysis is basically a tool to understand scientifically how those networks and relationships are working. If you could click next, please. So as you can see that usually it's about understanding the structure of networks, and so that's to help to identify opportunities and maximize collaborative efforts. And then the next little slide shows you how basically social network analysis can map a network, and that image to your right or left, I don't know how it's looking for you, it gives an example, a very small example of what are called nodes, which are in this case organizations, and then they are connected by ties, the lines that you see. So that's a very simple example of a map. Next slide, please. So just quickly about our approach, next slide, click. So basically it was an online survey that we distributed to the Greater Newcastle culturally and linguistically diverse community services sector. And there was 50 known organizations that we listed in the survey, 36 organizations completed, and there was actually additional organizations that we had not listed. So that increased the overall network in the Greater Newcastle region to 74 organizations. So please note that when we say Greater Newcastle, and maybe Debbie will talk a bit more to this, but we're talking about Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, and even sort of Maitland. So it is actually quite a large area, and Debbie will talk a bit more to that. So the next slide, what we tried to do is we tried to understand the connections and the relationships, and what we used a number of indicators or measures. So what we tried to understand was in that network in the Greater Newcastle region, how are organizations sharing information? How about joint funding? How about joint planning and analysis, joint projects, referrals of clients in and out, and shared resources? So these were our indicators or measures that we were analyzing very closely. And then just the next little slide, we then also had a sense-making workshop where a number of the organizations who completed the survey came together to make sense of it. Okay, next slide, please. So project findings, and I've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, so that's good. All right, next slide again. Thanks so much. Right, so what I'm just going to do quickly, and once again, with Debbie's help, we'll go a little bit deeper into some of the analysis and what is the benefit of this research for the sector. But what I wanted to say firstly was that we had, as we said, 74 organizations in total that we were able to map through the survey. So these organizations were a range of services. So there was called culturally and linguistically diverse services specifically, but there was also education services. So you might think about someone like TAFE New South Wales, or English as an additional language services in our region. Government services, so whether that be local government or health services, housing and homelessness services, interpreter services, legal services, etc. So as you can see, and that speaks to, at least in a lot of these more regional settings, the importance of the variety of services and organizations that are involved in responding to the needs of our communities. It's not necessarily just settlement specific or called specific services. So the next slide, if you go next, this is one of the network maps. Don't get scared. So this is one of the maps, and just so you know, the researchers and I, in collaboration with them, there was over 400 maps that were mapped out. So this was all about trying to understand how the relationships are working. As you can see in this map, the organizations, the names are not listed, but every dot there represents an organization in the Greater Newcastle region. And then what you can see here is how the different colors represent what type of service they provide, as I showed earlier in that table. And so in this way, you can then do a lot of analysis to understand how strong the ties are, how weak, etc. So then just a little bit about how the network is functioning. Next slide, please. So basically what we found, and if you just click next, the network in Newcastle overall has a very high level of connectivity. So this is an indicator of very cooperative working relationships. Next slide. It talks about a mature network. So it's suggesting that relationships are functioning well, and that they provide similar but not overlapping services, which is really important as well. So there's not a lot of duplication. It's suggesting that everybody is contributing in a useful way and providing their own kind of unique offering to clients in the community. Next slide. So now this is some of the scientific talk, low to mid-level density. So basically what this is talking about is it's talking about that the network is actually quite efficient. So it's saying that information is shared and resources. So what it's saying is that it's quite quickly from information to get from one organization to another, that it doesn't actually take a lot of organizations organizations to get the information. So this is suggesting this level of efficiency. And there's a report on this which explains it in much more detail because I'm doing it very quickly, but I'm just trying to give you a taste. Next slide. What was also quite good to see is that the network is quite decentralized. So this means that there's no one organization or group that's controlling or only coordinating the whole network, but several organizations were really well positioned. They were quite mature, and also they nurtured a lot of collaboration, information sharing, activating relationships, etc. And then the final one on this slide is that what really was a clear strength in this network in the Greater Newcastle region was that a lot of the organizations connected across more than just one measure. So earlier I talked about we looked at information sharing, resource sharing, etc. So what we found from the data was that the organizations don't just collaborate on sharing information, but they also collaborate on joint planning or joint resource sharing, which could be human resource, etc., which once again is a sign of quite a healthy network. Next slide. What I just wanted to show you here was this is what's called the interorganizational relationships continuum, 5 C's, very long name, but basically shows about how relationships in a network can function. And if you look at the bottom, it talks about competition, cooperation, coordination, collaboration, or consolidation. If you click next, please. So I just want to note that each of these C's that you see below on the x-axis, they have merit. It's not saying that, so if you click again next, for example, collaborating when an organization only needs to cooperate will waste resources and is harder to sustain. So it doesn't mean that we all need to cooperate or etc. And then next slide, we found that the Newcastle called network is positioned at the cooperation coordination level. So it shows how the sector is able to work together to achieve both organizational and sectoral goals. Next, please. So I'm just going to fly through these because then Debbie will talk more to it. But some opportunities for strengthening was that participants did talk about a preference for more collaboration related to planning and analysis, joint planning, and I guess more strategic work rather than just information sharing or others. There was a preference for this. Next, please. Also, there was, as we've talked about today, is when growing challenges of resource scarcity, funding, human. And then if you go next, what we also showed though, was that in this network, even though the resources are scarce, and this is a problem, the organizations were still able to mobilize their relationships and resources in a really efficient and effective way to still deliver services, activities, etc. And then the next slide, so this just talks again about how they have built a good foundation between the network organizations. And then the last slide from me, another opportunity for strengthening, if you just go to the next slide, thanks, is just talking about how some organizations can be on the periphery, and this is dangerous. So if you look at this zoomed in image, you see that there's this one organization, S50, and then they're connected to these 5 or 6 organizations. If you were to take that organization or person out of the network, how do those organizations stay connected? This is sometimes the weakness of a network if there's one organization or one person who is connected to many organizations. But of course, noting that this is based on the survey data and not all organizations completed the survey. So this is just a point in time piece of data. And if you just go next, so 19 organizations were some of these more periphery organizations that we noted. And if you go next, the majority of them were mainstream community organizations, but also included unfunded voluntary organizations. And so this is a real question of how do we ensure that these ones, and if you go next slide, that are maybe already a bit isolated, particularly voluntary organizations, how do we ensure that they're still included in the network? Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to hand over to Debbie now. So if you just click to the next slide and I'll stop talking, but off you go, Debbie. Thank you so much.
Debbie, you're on mute.
Okay, I'll start again. Thank you very much, Simone, for capturing that so well in a nutshell. Thanks, Dor, for that prompt. The City of Newcastle Research engaged with the NSS because we're the conveners of the Multicultural Action Group Greater Newcastle. So the survey was actually conducted with people that were engaged in that MAG network. We note that the city of Newcastle has a population of about 170,000 people. However, many of the agencies that are part of the MAG network are actually also operating in Lake Macquarie, Maitland cities as well. So with this research, the outcome reflects more than just what's going on in the city of Newcastle alone, which bodes well for David Wilson's hub and spoke model of refugee settlement that he's talking about, because of that active activity already happening in other parts of our region. So the Greater Newcastle region actually has a population of about 500,000 once you include some of those other LGAs immediately around our area. From, sorry, next slide, please. The value of the research for the MAG, the Multicultural Action Group Greater Newcastle, was several-fold. But first of all, it was really affirmation and, in a sense, evidence of the high level of collaboration that we do together. So that was really affirming of what we were doing, but also helped us to look further at what that could be giving us to further inform what we do and strengthen what we do. So that was brilliant. The planning day, that this photo here is of our MAG planning day that happened earlier this year, and some of our planning was informed by the outcomes of the survey. Next slide, please. The researchers' reflections about the building of collaboration, in the report they talked about, so often with collaboration, while it is great between organisations, it's quite often reliant on relationships between individuals in those organisations. And so it was really important for us to look at how are we building collaboration that is based on organisational relationships that are not going to fall over if one individual steps away or moves on or goes to another agency. So that recognition was really important for us in looking at how are we going to build an organising team for our MAG that is not reliant on one person as convener to plan and run the MAG, and also that we have it like an organising group that we would be able to draw our organisations in, and a commitment from our organisations. The third point there that was really important for us in terms of the value to the MAG specifically was that reflection piece around the periphery organisations. And so the researchers, and Simone actually gave me permission to ask a bit more about who those organisations were. So it's not public in the public document, but so we understood more about who's on the periphery and how do we need to connect them. And there was a group of them that were actually youth work organisations that were not actually connected to the MAG network, but were very involved in the Multicultural Youth Workers Network. And so by it was a simple case of inviting them to actually be on the MAG network if they wanted to draw them into that wider network. So that there, in a sense, we've solved that problem. There's another group of people that were actually First Nations organisations that people who'd completed the survey identified as groups that they worked with in the multicultural space, in the called space. And so we need to have conversations with some of those First Nations organisations and ask them, do they want to be part of this wider network or not, to give them that opportunity to join it. The third thing that was really important, and the one that we need to do the most work around in, is looking at these called volunteer groups that were highlighted, that were on the periphery and not been connected. So the Muslim Women's Association, the Hunter Africans Communities Council were some of the examples of those organisations. It highlighted for us an issue that we were already sort of considering, but really now we have put it front and centre of how are we going to, as a multicultural action group network, engage with these organisations that are not available to come along to a meeting that happens during office hours. How do we want to actively involve? We're now actively involved in discussing operations for incorporating that regular engagement with the called out organisations and the existing MAG groups. So looking at changing the times of some meetings, having other mechanisms for making connections with people that are actively involved in either leadership or as active community members in some of these volunteer organisations. There's also value from this research that goes much wider than what we can gain as the MAG, and so for governments at all three levels of government, local, state and federal, but also regional centres themselves and multicultural sector organisations operating in regional sectors, regional areas. This research has great value for us. First of all, it's giving us an understanding of the size and nature of the service sector in an established regional settlement setting like Newcastle. So there were 13 core called organisations that were very interconnected. Remember, Simone said no one was seen as the lead or that it all hung on one organisation, but those 13 called organisations were very interconnected. And they're not just settlement programs looking at what happens in that first initial stage of arrival, but that broader sense of as being called responsive and supporting our called communities ongoing in their lives in Australia in different ways and engaging with them. There were 36 other agencies identified in that general call network, and then a total, as Simone said, of 74 agencies that were identified as having some connection. So that size of sector in supporting regional settlement is really important, particularly when we've talked about that importance of collaboration and partnership, which is, I think, the second piece from this that is a demonstration of the kind of collaboration and partnership that is vital in regional settlement. We've talked about it earlier today as something that we know in practice, and here's a piece of research that actually shows how important that collaboration is in terms of to deliver the services. The fact that we actually get to work together in so many ways has allowed us also to pull off emergency responses to things in a very short space of time. And one obvious example is in response to COVID. Last year, we went into lockdown early in August. I think it was the 4th of August, Newcastle went into lockdown. And by the 9th of August, we had started our first weekly information session for active community members and community leaders in the call community. And they continued weekly through to the end of the year. So NSS starts, Newcastle Police, Hunter New England Health, Multicultural Health and broader health services, and Hunter Multicultural Communities were very active then in maintaining that regular program. So that collaboration allowed us to have a really quick response to important issues that came up.
Could we wrap up as we?
Okay, I've got my last couple of things to say. Thank you very much, Jo. So the engagement of the other reflection was the engagement of both called specific organisations and mainstream services in that high level of collaboration was really important in regional settlement. That it's not something that's being done by the called organisations, but mainstream services are deeply involved in the response. So in closing, I'd like to thank the City of Newcastle for providing this important piece of research that has informed our local work here in the Greater Newcastle area and has significant value for the local, state and national decision makers around responses and support for regional settlement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie and Simone, for that insightful coverage on the network analysis. And I like the 5 C's that are form part of the model: cooperation, competition, collaboration, coordination, and consultation. I really like how important you were able to map, and if there's a drop in one of the providers, it actually impacts the connection within the group, as there could be a center for that. And wonderful to see that there's that amount of collaboration. We never get to see it happening, but this is what actually visually represents how that connections is important and how it works in practice. So well done, and thank you on that. I'd like now to invite Yamama Aga, who is the General Manager, SSI General Manager for Newcomer Settlement and Integration, to provide her reflection and give us a key theme that she's been able to collect from the today's sessions. So Yamama, if you're there, welcome you to the mic.
Thank you, Dor, and thank you to the previous speakers. Thank you, Arun, Mena, Simone, and Debbie. The analysis of the called sector in Newcastle is really fascinating, and there are certainly parallels that can be drawn when it comes to settlement services or called services in infrastructure in different regions as well. It's a great example of coordination, collaboration, and also leadership from local government. I would like also to acknowledge that I am on the direct land and pay my respect to the elders past and present. In reflecting on today's event, I want to give recognition to the important role of settlement support in regional areas and the work that our regional partners play in supporting newcomers across New South Wales. During the panel discussion, we heard about the challenges around and need for community building in order to facilitate social cohesion and belonging. When communities can come together to share and exchange culture, they feel more connected, and this is really important for their long-term settlement. We also heard about the constraints in some settlement programs, such as the SETS program, around visa eligibility and new migrants' barriers to accessing financial support. Finally, the importance of partnerships like the New South Wales Settlement Partnership, which allow providers to maximize knowledge, expertise, and resources that ultimately benefit the clients, is an important factor contributing to successful settlement in regional New South Wales. We've heard it from David. We've heard about his vision for regional settlement, and that certainly has given us, as practitioners and those working in regional settlement policy, a lot of to think about. We know how important the regions are in revitalizing migration to Australia, and that it requires a whole of government inclusive approach in consultation with people working in this sector to support settlement capacity in the regions and encourage retention through employment opportunities, housing, and strong infrastructure and services. We've heard about the focus on social cohesion, on the government commitment to regional settlement and the percentage of people that potentially will settle in regional areas. We've also heard that we do have a great opportunities to have input and to contribute to the future of settlement and how we shape it by responding to the discussion paper that will be coming out from the department very soon. Also, the importance of thinking about the aspirations of people we work with, not just about how we support them to access services, but listen to their aspirations and assess their capabilities and the skills. How do we coordinate? And it was really of great interest hearing about how do we think about providing services to skilled migrants and make sure that they're not left out. I think we're all interested in this as well. By coming together today to discuss these important issues and reflecting on the themes and case studies from our report, Insights into Regional Settlement in Practice, you have all made a great contribution to the conversation around regional policy development. We thank you all for your contribution. It's been absolutely a great morning listening to all of you and the great work you do. And I wish that we continue to have similar conversations. Thank you all. Back to you, Dor.
Thank you very much, Yamama. What a wrap to the day, and it wonderfully captured the experiences that we have today, the things we heard, the conversation and perspective that we share today. I'd like now to welcome Raquel back to the stage. Raquel is going to go through the policy recommendation from the Insights into Regional Settlement in Practice, and to provide the way forward in how do we go forward with these recommendations. This is coming from years of experience from people on the ground, noting that this is also first-hand experience of people that are currently going through settlement and also people that are supporting those people going through settlement. So Raquel, take it over.
Thank you, Dor. Thank you, Yamama, for that presentation. That was great. So we're just getting to the end of it. It seems like it. So I'll try and do this within the next 8 minutes. So obviously the recommendations and way forward have been worked on and thought about and discussed, and obviously based on the paper that you've seen prior to this. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the recommendations, the main finding from the report, obviously, and the discussion today is that successful regional settlement depends on a number of factors. But I think the key of it is a holistic approach that we need to consider when thinking about regional settlement. And obviously consider the wide range of experiences facing migrants and refugees in regional areas. Most importantly, to also think about the economic and social dimensions that we need to consider when we're thinking of that approach. Therefore, the recommendation is a bit of a big, like a whole of government regional strategy. This recommendation is not in no way innovative, because there has been discussed in many other policy papers and where this issue has been looked at and has been previously recommended. However, we think that it's important to have that again stated. And so under that overall recommendation, we have identified four areas where specific other recommendations have been made, and I'll take you through those now. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll go through the first aspect of it. Can we move to that? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I think you moved too fast. You have to go back to the second slide, which is funding. Thank you. So we talked about today that obviously settlement services and the workers in regional areas are in the best position to provide a range of services that can assist migrants and refugees in establishing their lives in these locations. So they're crucial really in helping newly arrived people to overcome challenges, obstacles, and that they face and that they might actually put at risk the settlement. So that means really in practical terms that they have to play a very active role. I think that Sharon at the very beginning spoke about their very active role and the extra mile that the settlement workers have to go through, particularly in the lives of new arrivals. And also, particularly when there is not established migrant community or ethno-specific communities, infrastructure and services. So we know that in maybe regional areas are less resourced than in metropolitan areas. So the two recommendations here are crucial really and relate to funding. So it is important to consider adopting a model for the delivery of settlement services that is adequately funded and resourced. It's also important that that funding is in line with the geographic coverage as well as the number of people that are settled in those regions, not just same for all, because it isn't. And obviously the delivery of services is totally depending on the numbers. So therefore, allocation of funding and a model for regional areas to deliver settlement services that addresses medium to long-term outcomes in a sustainable fashion is the recommendation. So if we can go to the next slide. So the next slide is under social cohesion and capacity building. And I think a number of speakers have spoken about these two concepts as well. And so sense of belonging equates to social cohesion, somebody said, I think it was Jane. And so in the long term, and it is a critical factor in regional settlement. So we mustn't dismiss this concept in favor of economic consideration only. I think it's important that we do not do that. Research also indicates that regional communities can provide an extra challenge for the engagement of migrants and refugees, where community attitudes might be a key and they might not be so positive than in metropolitan centers, perhaps. So therefore, we think that culturally inclusive practice must be supported, as well as professional development. And these three recommendations are key to successful social cohesion and capacity building of organizations that are involved in settlement, and not just settlement services, but other services as well. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So here in the last slide, we talk about organizational capacity and evidence-based approaches to settlement. And so these recommendations obviously address the support for organizational capacity, having a coordinated and evidence-based approach to settlement, regardless of the regional areas where the services are located. So we therefore recommend that a model must include funding, targeting, community engagement and development, which I think, in my observation, it has been lost a little in the past decades. And so it really needs to be also with an emphasis on sustainability and retention of people in the identified regions. So somebody spoke about the fact that in some region, I think it was David, spoke about it, in some regions people didn't stay in the region, and it's probably obviously because there's not enough of that work done in the region to retain people as well. We also recommend that targeted funding for research that investigates the experiences and views of all involved, so that we consider their views and their experiences in an effort to build evidence. So evidence is the buzzword. It has been for a number of years now. And so I think it is really important, if we talk about evidence, that we actually have enough funding to be able to do research on that very topic. And so they're the 4 areas where the recommendations sit. As you can see, the lightest is community engagement and community development, research on newly arrived communities, and settlement workers. So targeting the communities, targeting the workers, and targeting the work that is done to be able to understand the differences between what is called mainstream services and specialized services is really important to identify those differences and to build capacity as well. And so the next slide, please. It's an important recommendation, and it is around infrastructure and services, of course, but it is about mutual long-term benefits. So the key word is infrastructure. So we recommend that the infrastructure is considered and supported when thinking of regional settlement. I think we all spoke about this, I think including the department as well. And so we recommend this because we believe that the presence of a strong infrastructure and essential services is pivotal to the success of regional settlement. Regional settlement is a unique opportunity to achieve mutual long-term benefits for the community, migrants and refugees, and Australia as a whole. It's very clear that an increased population of willing new settlers can assist the economy of that particular region. However, for this to succeed, services and infrastructure in regional areas must be adequate to support an increased population. It is generally accepted that regional communities have or might have a lower standard of provision of key infrastructure than metropolitan areas. I think somebody else spoke about that when they talked about transport and perhaps the lack of transport. And so they're key services in our view that must be considered. So important for us to bring the equation to a level playing field when we're thinking about infrastructure and services in regional Australia or in regional New South Wales in particular. So they're the four areas of recommendation. Within those, obviously, are a number of separate recommendations. And I'll take you to the last slide now, which it is a way forward. And obviously, the way forward is not, again, it's not very innovative in a way, because we have been doing this for many years. And obviously what we are thinking that we will continue to do is to advocate for these recommendations to be considered and if possible implemented in some way at our federal, state and local levels. there is at the moment some work done around discussing these issues. And so we will continue to do that. But most importantly, I think, and it has obviously the credibility and the status, is the local engagement in a day-to-day work that all of us need to be obviously doing and needs recognition as well. But way forward, again, advocacy and local engagement, big words that need to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Raquel, for highlighting what we need to get from this. The crux of today has been summarized by what you mentioned in your last contribution. Can I also emphasize that the report came with an addendum, the case studies. You would find that these recommendations were well explained and into details in the addendum document. So happy for you to read and have a look at those recommendations in there. Folks, that brings us to the conclusion of today. And before I conclude, I would like to thank the following people. I'll start with Sophia, who has worked hard to coordinate this and bring together our regional partners. Thank you to all of the organization in the NSB regional partners who have been working on this. Debbie, Raquel, Mena, Jane, Laura, who couldn't be here today, and the previous people that we used to work at these organizations. Thank you to the NSB team for their usual support, Sky and the team for supporting this event, and for the leadership of the organization that we worked with on this particular event, Violet, Yamama, and Sharon for supporting this particular key work that we embarked on. I also like to thank the participant today, and particularly our clients, Arun and what's her name, Zach, for sharing their personal experiences. Can be very, very difficult and really challenging to share your experiences as a new migrant, and also to see where your vulnerability can be exposed to a community of people that may not you may not have met. So thank you for all of your contribution to today, and to David Wilden for sharing the insights. We look forward to working with the government on the future of settlement paper that will be released very soon. And to the audience participant who have shared today, asked questions, and be with us on this important work, we thank you for taking the time. It's not easy to take 4 hours of your day to come and share with this wealth of information. Thank you, everyone. You have a lovely day, and I wish you all the best.